James Williams back again, and we do like sharing the love here with our industry analysts. To start off with today, we had Transformer, we've had Kaleido, we're having Kaleido again, and tomorrow you can join us at the beginning of the day for Omdia as well. So I'd like to now introduce John King to you. John, lovely, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, James. Yep, a very warm welcome to you
Indeed,
all. Good to be here.
Not too shabby here up north as well, near Bradford. So, John, fantastic to have you on. You're the Group Chief Commercial Officer with Kaleido, and I'll let you take it away with your private network session. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, James, and welcome to everyone who's with us today. I see we have the deck loaded up, so that's fantastic. Right, so let's begin. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be holding a panel discussion, all with the goal of mapping the private network opportunity and approach. So at Kaleido, as a research firm, it's not just the roaming space that we operate in. We also do a lot of work in what we call connectivity sectors, specifically to private networks. That's been for the last 2.5, 3 years, one of the biggest, buzz topics within the industry. And we find ourselves constantly being inundated by firms across the ecosystem wanting to understand their potential play in the ecosystem, to quantify how it's actually going, shaping forward. Is it just a hype topic? What's the actual substance behind it? And of course, underlying it all, what is the best approach for them to take to best, harness that opportunity? That's what we're going to be spending some time looking through with you today. So if you take a quick look at the agenda, what we're going to start by doing, my colleague James Moar, Principal Analyst at Kaleido, he will be coming on board and sharing some of the insights from Kaleido's latest member-specific research, where we conduct industry surveys on private networks, we talk to the enterprises, we quantify the market in terms of now and moving forward into the future. So he'll be sharing some of those findings with you. And following that, I think when we discuss a topic such as this, especially, it's important to get experts on the line with us to be sharing their views from the ground. So once James has finished, it's fantastic that we're going to be welcoming Wagner from BAYFU, Asaf Gigi from floLIVE, Richie, Gill from Core Wireless, and Nanda, Menon from Athonet. And we'll say hello to them a little bit later and let them both introduce themselves and their roles within the companies. We have some good panel questions lined up that should really help you as an audience be informed on this topic. But of course, we do want to try and get any questions that you have answered as well, and optimize the time slot that we have. So as always, if you have any questions as we go, throw them in the comments section. We will do our best to get through all of them within our allocated time. But on that note, I think it's time to get into the actual research from our side. James, are you online with us?
Yes, I am online now, I think.
Perfect. Yes, we hear you down the way. So, James, I'm going to hand it over to you, and maybe, like I said, set the scene a bit about some of our research. So I'll hand it to you to go through these insights and really help listeners understand what's going on within the private network ecosystem.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, the first thing is that private networks are not new. They've been utilized in industrial and public safety contexts for many years, whether from private Ethernet and Wi-Fi networks to Tetra and P25 connectivity. Those last two are probably the biggest names in this sort of a space, but all of this has been sort of steadily being replaced by cellular networks, firstly via 4G LTE, and we're also seeing a growing interest in private 5G as well. Private 5G capabilities are driving changes right the way across the board, both from those who have already got involved into the 4G LTE space and those that are upgrading from those legacy technologies as well. So 5G is kind of it's kind of a situation where a rising tide is raising all boats, so to speak, that 5G is driving awareness across the board for everyone with private networks, even from those who have never really before considered them. And that's driving quite a bit of the interest in some of the questions, which we'll see a little later. But interest is coming from all areas, many different industries, and many different types of connectivity ecosystem players are offering private network services as well. There's many different routes to market for this. The biggest use cases are those that deploy dedicated networks for where other forms of connectivity, such as public cellular or Wi-Fi, is either unavailable or insufficient from a performance or a security perspective. This can range from high-speed coverage in a factory to power automation, where you can't have an awful lot of latency, to wide-range coverage across an oil field, a wind farm, or trying to get coverage underground, that sort of thing, in a mine. There's also a growing number of uses for connected logistics and automated use cases across the automation as well, things like ports and that sort of thing, as well as campus networks for healthcare sites and smart cities where security is a concern, as well as a consistent service. It's not necessarily that they want absolutely the fastest speeds on offer, but consistency beyond things, what Wi-Fi and the like can bring is what's going to be key for those use cases. Because private network operators don't need to own network spectrum in the same way as they do for public networks, that also means there's not a single gatekeeper for the technology. So we're seeing interest from MNOs in the private network space, but they are one player among many. And we're also seeing specialist IoT-based MVNOs and MVNEs and other IoT connectivity providers of other types moving into the space, challenging the network solutions vendors who have taken an early lead in this market in terms of size. We're also seeing systems integrators and hardware providers of other types coming into the space, offering private network connectivity as part of solution-driven propositions. And so the key for leadership in the private networks market is being able to leverage all of these different disparate pieces. There's quite a bit of conversation about who project manages any given network or leads a particular deployment, and that sort of thing. That management aspect and that ability to manage the partnerships that are going to be necessary in this space is a key competence for the private networks ecosystem. And exactly how private networks are deployed and who will be able to deployment is also dependent on spectrum availability. And there are 4 general models of spectrum use that are emerging, and that can that we can put that on a sort of a spectrum, if you like, excuse the pun, of greater or lesser liberalization for control and oversight beyond the company deploying the network. So from the least liberal to the most on the left to the most liberal on the right. To the left, we have mobile network operator owned spectrum that's assigned for private network use that is leveraged by both that goes through the channel of both the operator and the regulator. Typically, this is a form of subleasing and bringing in the net regulator to make sure that it's all kind of in order to be used in that fashion. There's quite a hands-on approach. Then we have the dedicated spectrum assigned by the regulator for private network use. So if you have, say, the previous model saying that a network operator can assign spectrum over to someone else with the permission of the regulator, this dedicated private network spectrum can be a growth of that. So both Germany's sort of location-based model and the model of CBRS from the US both fall into this bracket, that it's the regulator says this frequency is for private network use and you don't need to involve the operators. The kind of frequencies used here are sort of mid to high frequency bands, and usage is quite often either restricted to a specific area or to particular use cases, or if it's a bit more general, like the case with the CBRS, then it can be deprioritized under certain circumstances. You get priority licenses that are more formal licenses granted by the operator, and more general use can be pushed to the side in the right or maybe the wrong circumstances. So this is more flexible than the MNO-owned spectrum framework and can allow from deployments. Basically, if you have some equipment that works on the right frequencies and the right software to connect to that, whereas some others require some degree of formal license holder status from some party or other, which can fall outside of the traditional MNO or MVNO space. Germany, we've seen from the kinds of companies that have deployed there, there's a whole range of companies applying for use for dedicated private network spectrum. Network slicing is up next, and operates in a similar way to utilizing MNO-owned spectrum, except that the regulator isn't at all involved. So all agreements are purely commercial. That makes them a lot more flexible and a lot less dependent on what's available from the regulator. So it's a lot more determined by the market. Network slicing under 5G hasn't yet been widely commercialized, however, because of the complexity of rolling out all of those solutions and business models. On the right-hand side, this is possibly almost too liberal in that it's not licensed at all. It's the license exempt access, and it can provide cellular services in unlicensed spectrum bands. We've not seen a huge amount of development in this space so far. The most prominent example for private networking case is for the private networks use case is multi-fire, although LTE-U and some variants of that are also available. And so now we've got the full range of what those spectrums are. And the kind of things that can be done. What do customers want out of private networks? And so for that, we're going to turn to some of the results from Kaleido's recent connectivity survey. There is quite a high level of private interest in private networks, as you can see here, both from those who already have cellular IoT deployments and those who don't. There's barely any range of difference between those who already have a deployment and those who don't that are actively considering it. Although the ones that already have IoT are more likely to have already deployed to some degree, and some people are even considering that private networks aren't part of the IoT at all. So there may be some range of trying to bring people on board who don't consider it part of the IoT. So, but I'll leave that for the wrangling of peculiarities of marketing to sort out. But when we look at the benefits or the perceived benefits of private networks, the biggest use case out there is to extend the existing capabilities and the existing coverage, no matter what level of involvement that a given company has within the private networks ecosystem. So there's a good level of awareness about what private networks can do in fairly broad terms. And there's less interest, as you can see from the second highlighted statistic down there. Those are all specific network characteristics, and that's relatively low down on what people think the benefits are. And so that means that while there's quite a high awareness of private networks overall, and that 5G is potentially something that is driving those capabilities, or driving that awareness, 5G's actual capabilities aren't the thing that enterprises necessarily want from their private networks at this stage. So turning to what they do think is important, if we could just have the next slide, please, John. No, sorry, we're already there. Our survey noticed that device management is key, both for those with a private network and those who are thinking about getting one, who are considering it. Respondents want to be sure that their endpoint devices are connected, configured, and managed in a way that best suits them. Interestingly, though, there's less of a focus on the overall network management being optimized, which suggests, again, that the actual capabilities of the network are not something that is that in view for people wanting to deploy these types of networks. And I think that's quite possibly because respondents aren't sure how suitable private networks are for them, or exactly what their capabilities are. You look at the results on the right hand side there. Over half of the respondents reported that they don't know how to find out if private networks are a good fit if they are considering private networks. And around 30% of everyone considering to adopt private networks aren't sure that their specific needs will be met by private networks. So this points to a need for further education about what specific benefits the private networks can bring and how that fits with client-specific needs. It also means that we're not ready for a productized private network market yet, or maybe never will be. And so vendors need to go to potential clients with solutions that they can offer rather than capabilities, because there's not that much understanding of how a given capability will meet a particular need. And finally, the buzz around private networks has been quite high, and it will generate a lot of spend in the space in the coming years. We expect over $7 billion in both CapEx and OpEx spend by 2026, with a CAGR of 55% over the forecast period. The biggest region for this will be the East Asia and Pacific region, with the largest, which will be the largest market in terms of revenue, with over $2 billion attributable to the region during the forecast period. But North America, with its more liberal licensing regime, however, will be the fastest growing market, as the biggest single market in East Asia and Pacific, China. That's dominated by MNOs in offering private networks and has a relatively inflexible scheme for deploying spectrum. Australia is also a fairly large market here with a relatively liberal and open scheme for deployment, but it won't reach the scale of the US simply because it's very, very specifically focused on particular industries in Australia. And with that, I think we can begin our panel discussion, and I will hand over back to John.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. I'm trying to cram as much in to a short session as we can.
Absolutely.
But I think that sets the scene really nicely, actually, for our panelists as well. And so if we're able to bring in our experts, so Christian, Asaf, Richie, and Nanda, if we're able to bring them in, fantastic. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you with us. So, as you know, there's quite a few questions, and I want to maximize the time that we spend listening to yourselves today. To start with, though, I think what would be fantastic is we just wait for Asaf to come on with his camera as well. I'd like a quick introduction just to each of you. If you can just quickly share a little bit about your role and the company as well, just for the audience if they're not familiar. I think that would be really good. So, Christian, can we start with yourself, and then we can move on, Nanda, to you, and Richie, you can follow?
Of course. Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present here something. We are a company from Germany, Bayerische Funknetz GmbH, but it's a short is BAYFU, and we are dealing with private mobile networks on the one side. So we are more on the end customer side. So we are helping the companies to make the step easier to join in this telecom world. So what we are doing is that we are consulting these guys. We are helping them to find the right infrastructure, the right architecture. We are consulting at RFQ processes, RFI processes, and up to the project management.
Perfect. Thanks, Christian. Nanda, if we move on to yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nanda Menon from Athonet. I'm Senior Vice President for Corporate Development. I manage the relationships with our major customers globally, particularly the hyperscalers and the large mobile operators, and also some end customers and system integrators as well. Athonet was founded by a team that came out of Ericsson in 2005. Back then, we saw a gap in the market. We saw Wi-Fi being rolled out in carpeted areas and beginning to engender a world that was becoming more and more wireless first on the industrial side and the corporate side. At the same time, you had mobile network operators who were building vast national scale networks. But we saw this huge unserved market in the middle for people who needed something that was better than Wi-Fi, a lot better than Wi-Fi, but gave them the kind of control that they could not get with a mobile operator's network. If it was a port, a mine, public safety, all of these areas covering wide areas, large warehouses, factories, utilities, they needed something that could be much more performant than Wi-Fi, cover large areas, but gave them the control that a mobile operator could not. So we decided to focus and build something called a private cellular network. We deployed the world's first ever private LTE network in 2011 for NL, which is today the world's largest private network for the world's largest utility. And we've got thousands of instances deployed now across the world over the last decade. And we look forward to doing even more. and getting to 1 million networks deployed by the end of this decade.
Perfect. Thanks, Nanda. Richie, if we move on to yourself.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Richie Gill. I'm the Director of Product Management at Core Wireless. Core, the company has been there for almost 2 decades now. Originally, the company started as what we used to call it as a machine-to-machine connectivity provider, and has now moved on to much of a IoT connectivity and a solution phase. Our focus in the past has been primarily providing connectivity globally by working with different carriers across the globe. And in addition to that, we have enhanced or built our own capabilities on the core network side. So my role within the company right now is to focus on private networks, agnostic of the technology. So they could be cellular, they could be LoRaWAN based, they could be Wi-Fi. That's the part I like. So it's really focusing on the use cases and providing the customers with the right technology. So that's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Richie. And finally, Asaf.
Finally. So hi, everybody. My name is Asaf Gigi. I'm VP of Marketing at floLIVE. A few words about the company. So floLIVE was founded in 2016. We are on one hand, a global connectivity provider with a very large connectivity library across different countries and regions. And on the other hand, we are also a technology infrastructure provider for mobile operators, IoT and MVNOs, and even larger enterprises. One of the unique, I would say, characteristics of floLIVE is the fact that we are, as I said, a service provider on one hand, providing global connectivity services, and on the other hand, we fully own our entire technology stack, starting from the core network to the billing systems, SIM management, and connectivity management. We have recently entered the mobile network space as well, with a somewhat unique offering for private networks, which we may discuss further on this call.
Perfect. No, thanks, Asaf. Thanks to all of you. So, right, without further ado, let us get into some of these questions then, off the back of what James shared. And I guess what I'd like to start with, and Richie, I'll come to you first with this. Okay, so if I'm a customer, okay, and I'm interested in deploying a private LTE or 5G network, what is that consumer journey going to look like for me, and how, I guess, if there's any kinks in the road that you see, how can the industry help to smooth them?
Yeah, no, it's a valid question, John, and something most of us, especially in this group, I'm sure we come across this almost every day or during every customer interaction. I think what I feel the gap is most of us, or the industry, has been very much focused on the terminology and the capabilities. I think even James mentioned that we all talk about all the capabilities that 5G offers, but where we lack, or where we've been lacking so far, are what problems are we really solving? I think the first thing we need to do when it comes to starting that customer journey is take a look at what is it that we are trying to solve, what use cases are we trying to solve. Maybe there's an existing solution the customer is already using, but it's not working well for them. So our approach really, when it comes to this customer journey, at a high level, I would say there could be 5 steps if I can define. The first one starts with the customer requirements, which is exactly what I mentioned earlier on, is talking to the customer about the use cases and the problems we are trying to solve, and not about the broad, the speeds and the latencies. So that's the first one. And then once we have a good understanding of what the use case that we are trying to target, the next step in this customer journey is really about planning. So planning in terms of how many sites are we talking about, right? What kind of sites are these? And also things like the services. For example, are we talking about data, voice, data only? So all these factors do play, and still we're not at the stage where we can recommend a solution. So we're still in the requirement gathering phase, followed by a site survey that captures the physical requirements. And then once we have all the information, it's it's all about designing the solution for the customer. So again, the thing is not to use the terminology too much and come up with a design that meets the customer needs. And this design, in the third component or the third phase, which is about designing, this is where we will start the journey by looking at what vendors do we need to engage, right? So for example, if we're trying to build a private network for a mining customer versus it's an enterprise customer with multiple facilities. So what are some of the vendors we need on the radio side? What kind of access points we need? So in this phase, this is part of the design phase where we bring in all the vendors based on the solution that we are designing for the customer. And then once we have a good understanding of, this is the hardware and the software piece for these physical locations, the last but not the least is actually to deploy it. This is what we call as the installation phase or the deployment phase. Now, this is a phase where, companies would come in, either, they engage third parties, but the whole goal there is to deploy a network. We also call it a carrier-grade network for that enterprise customer. It is one of the most important part because if the network is not deployed correct, it'll, we'll continue to have issues in terms of coverage and also performance-wise. So once the proper deployment is done, testing is done, we're not done yet. So the last phase of the journey, what we call as is, once the network is up and running, it's now all about managing that network. So once the private network is fully installed, managing the network, making sure operationally it's working, continue to be an ongoing process.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, there's a lot, like you said, there's a lot to consider and take in there. So I appreciate the comprehensive answer. Christian, from your end, I'm curious, is there anything that you would, I guess, want to add into that from your perspective in the market?
Yes, I think we are a little step before. So we are entering a little a step before to address these mobile private networks. So we see, first of all, there is a pure interest in 5G. They heard it, they saw it, they got it from their boss. Hey, please take care about 5G. Is this a valid technology? And can you give us an answer? And this is something where we are involved, so to help them to understand what is the 5G exactly and what is the difference between the 5G and the Wi-Fi infrastructure they are mostly used on that. And here we see a lot of first of all misunderstanding still in the industry, that they are thinking this is the same as a mobile network from a mobile network operator, or they are misunderstanding in this is the same as Wi-Fi. so this is one step we're dealing very often. And once we did this, and once everyone in the company is understanding what does it mean a mobile private network, what are the possibilities, what are the advantage, and what are also the limitations, in terms of handsets, availability, in terms of some other things. Then we are going one step, and then I fully agree on Richie that now the business case, the use cases are defined, the business case behind what are alternatives on that, and this is always a situation, a phase where we see at the customers, I will not say a fight, but it's the IT department and the OT department. Yeah? So the IT department often says, okay, you can do this with Wi-Fi, no problem on that. Yeah. The OT department says, no, I cannot do it. And here we are in the middle, and we are trying to channelize these topics and these doubts or arguments. Yeah. So at the end, once this is all done, I think Richie made it as a very, very good customer journey, or described a very good customer journey. Then there is often a big issue at the end, or not an issue, but a challenge at the end, and this is the integration. This is the integration of the mobile network in this company, in this IT, OT departments, in these operational things, and what can we do now with this? And here we see a lot a lot to do, a lot to consulting approaches, and that's the customer journey from our point of view.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And like you said, I think it's important, like you mentioned, there's these different elements and different parts of the process where you come in, and it's important to be aware of how to fit together. Yeah? Nanda, I just wanted to see if there's anything, I guess, additional that you'd want to add from your side, given the, I guess, range of customers Athonet already has in this space.
Yeah, sure. I think both Christian and Richie talked a lot about the experience that the customers have. I think the few things that I'd like to add to it is, first of all, the cellular world has typically spoken a different language from the IT and OT world, particularly because cellular is built on completely different protocols from what the IT world is used to. So the first thing that we do when we speak to customers is to speak to them in the same language that they do. I mean, what they understand, rather than slices and terminology that is unique to cellular. What they understand is network segmentations, VLANs. How does getting them to understand that private cellular behaves more like a LAN network rather than a big operator, a national scale operator network. So getting them to understand that is very important. And then, of course, the use case is very important as well. I mean, James, I think in your summary, I really loved that point where you pointed out that the number one reason people look to use this is coverage. And that's our experience. People come to you, and the customer journey normally, so far, 80% of the time begins with the fact that they just don't have connectivity and they don't have coverage. They've tried Wi-Fi, it doesn't quite get there. There's very often a national scale network from a mobile operator doesn't quite have the penetration across the site or the reliable coverage across the site that they need, and they can't. And even if they put those things onto the devices, they can't create their own VLANs, they can't create their own network segmentations, they can't assign their own IP addresses, or if they are able to do that, the mobile operators will do that only for very, very big customers with very complex systems, which tend to be quite expensive as well. So leading them in from that journey through all the kinds of things that Richie and Christian have talked about is really the important part. The one thing that I would add is don't forget spectrum, because this is a very regulated industry, unlike Wi-Fi, where you can just put things up and radiate whatever you want. The customer journey normally begins with spectrum. So the first question is, do you have spectrum? Yes or no? Because if it's no, then it's a very, the customer journey is very short. But if you do have spectrum, then of course we can go down all of these routes. The other point that I'd bring out, and what makes cellular unique, really is the fact that you're not solving a single network issue. You really are solving a problem of you're bringing economies of scope. So it's not just replacing Wi-Fi or extending Wi-Fi. It's often also providing push-to-talk. You're upgrading your push-to-talk solutions, which is where a lot of the initial engagement in private cellular came from wanting to upgrade from narrowband push-to-talk to be able to do broadband and share video. You may also, as you talked about, there's the OT department, which may have a completely different view of what it needs from the IT department. So all of a sudden, you're dealing with many different use cases in the company. Interdisciplinary approaches cutting across various silos. So this requires a very different mindset and a very different way to evolving the customer journey as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Nanda. Would you know that we've got just over 5 minutes left and we're one question in? So for the rest of it, this is what happens when we have such a passionate area to talk about as well, which is normal. But for the rest, let us try to almost do a fire round of questions, if you will, with short answers. So the next one, Asaf, I'm going to come to yourself. And it's about the hyperscalers, because we've seen hyperscalers, AWS and Microsoft and Google enter the market. What does that mean, in your opinion, for the market, and how do you expect it to impact, if at all, player strategies?
So first of all, I hope none of them are present in this discussion. No, actually, I really think it's great for the market. These hyperscalers entry into this domain is positive. It's a positive indication that there's a true market need there. So we're definitely in favor of this entrance. But second, it's a proof point that cloud native solutions are becoming quote unquote legitimate among the enterprises. Up until recently, most of the campus networks were either Wi-Fi or other technologies, but they were mainly on-premise. And I think now the market is kind of opening up to cloud-based or cloud-native solutions, which is also a very positive indication. Last, I think it shows that the market is starting to acknowledge the benefits of cellular over other connectivity means. We don't have too much time, but if you kind of break this into one major difference between cellular versus the other connectivity means is that cellular was designed and built from top down, meaning large number of devices, seamless handover of cells between cells, covering a large area, inherent security, and so on. Solutions such as Wi-Fi and similar were built bottom up. Small number of devices, a limited scope, no real handover, and so on. And I think the more the enterprises become advanced and with advanced needs, cellular is definitely the way for them to go. Having said that, I think that the solutions these hyperscalers offer today are somewhat naive, and I'll try to explain. They're referring to things like setup, orchestration, management of a cellular network as something simple like storage, compute, running VLANs, as you mentioned earlier. This is not the case today. So we want this to be the case maybe sometime in the future, but today deploying a private network requires skills, RF knowledge, site surveys, IT network optimization, and so on, which these current solutions, I think, are lacking. Yeah. It's also a bit naive to think that today a standalone instance will solve the problems of the enterprises. Richie talked about the actual use case or the actual need of the enterprises, less about the technology. But today, customers, when they look for a private network, they're looking for resiliency, they're looking for reliability, and a big part of this is the ability to access the private network, the public network, or to jump off handover between the public and private networks. Again, the solutions offered today by these hyperscalers is mainly limited to a campus and does not take into account these high availability needs. Last, most of the enterprises are not knowledgeable enough on managing a private cellular network or any size cellular network. And in most of the cases, they're looking for someone to do this management for them. The hyperscalers are not selling product. Okay, they must be able to provide a service. And since they're not a service provider or a connectivity service provider, I think this still adds I would say, a shortcoming to their offering today.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Asaf. And you know what? We only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to stick on what area that you just mentioned. And Richie, I'm going to bring it to you. The whole point about use cases that require the public-private network switching, which has been a big thing in our research as well. Are there other considerations that you think need to be made, when you're considering just enabling that element of that switchover?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and just continuing what Asaf just mentioned. So they are, out of all the use cases, there are very few use cases that require this mix of public and private connectivity. Something that is, I would say personally, is missing. Like nobody talks about it, but we are seeing actual use cases where mining is a good example. There is no public connectivity at a mining site practically. But you do have vehicles like trucks or other fleet that would actually come in or go from one location to another location. And then, they are using public connectivity at some point in their journey. So that's just one example, but then there are so many others, again, manufacturing facilities, warehouses. It's great to have a private network at a warehouse, but what happens when the fleet leaves the warehouse, drives across 3 or 5 cities? How do you maintain that visibility and control, right? So I would end up in saying that having that consistent management, of your assets, whether they are on a public or a private network, to me, that's the key. That's the power.
Yeah. No, Richie, that's fantastic. I know that we've gone over and have to draw it to a close, so I will say, big thank you to everyone for just joining us and your thoughts today, and to the audience as well. I think if you have questions around these areas, you've got, some of the leading firms here that are involved in this space, active in there. So let your questions fly, after the event if you're watching this back, and we can get follow-up from Nanda, Asaf, Christian, or Richie forward, or indeed ourselves. Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, stay with me.
Of course.
Lovely. John, great work. And I think you need another 60 minutes for that panel, at least, given you barely got to question one.
I think it's the sort of section when you're talking about something so disruptive and innovative in the market there, that I think there's so many different discussion points, and especially in private networks, people come in it from different perspectives, and there's so many different elements we've seen in the ecosystem that you need to put together, which is why we see so many partnerships in the industry as well.
And I picked up on this as well with 5G, because I remember when 5G came along, we all thought, what that means to us individuals, it means we can download a movie, I don't know, in 6 seconds rather than 2 minutes. But at the end of the day, does that really matter for most people? In private individuals, not really. It's real applications, I think, as we've been seeing throughout the day today, come into its own with IoT and particularly private networks.
Yes, you're exactly right. And you've hit the nail on the head, because it is really about those specific use cases that's driving demand. And the chaps talked about it there, about how different verticals, you can see those really realized happening here and now. Others, like you mentioned, might be a little bit further down the line, but the good thing that we see here is that very real demand in the here and now. Because again, private networks is nothing new, right? It's just coming under, I guess, increasing spotlights, as LTE then moves towards potential 5G networks as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I started off my telecoms career 30 years ago this year. It's shocking to think, but I started working for Siemens, and I had industrial placement in Germany, and they had their networks. They had EN, which is the public communication networks, and they had PN, private networks. So this was 30 years ago. They were talking about private networks. So like you said, it's nothing new. And it's something we've also talked about within our wholesale working group. So Kaleido Intelligence, as well as many other MEF members, are very active in our wholesale working group, because when it comes to the world of wholesale, people easily switch into the mindset thinking, hey, this is just voice, it's just SMS, but roaming and IoT and so many other areas come into the world of wholesale too. And we discussed this throughout the year as well. And we've got this event coming up on September the 14th and 15th, and you're going to be involved in that. Exactly.
Yes, we are. We're going to be sharing some of the latest insights. And you're right again, James. The whole area of wholesale, what's going on, especially within the roaming and the new technologies, it's a huge area for the ecosystem to get hold of.
It is. So coming up next, folks, we're going to be looking at South Africa in particular, because one working group we've had for a long time within MEF, but we haven't been able to really get it off the ground for the past few months, is banking fraud in South Africa. So join me coming up after for a very, very hard-hitting discussion looking at South Africa, banking fraud and telecoms fraud across the board in South Africa. So, John, thanks to you, Kaleido Intelligence, for putting this panel together. Much appreciated. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon, hopefully in person sometime. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks a lot.